Okay, so as you guys know, the Hoover Dam exploded. Okay, not the actual Hoover Dam, just a transformer at the Hoover Dam, which led me into talking about all the symbolism that is at the Hoover Dam, which goes back to the Illuminati and the Freemasons. Now, this is what the floor looks like at the Hoover Dam. We see the two fallen angels and we see this sign right here. But this sign looks like this sign, which is the Freemason sign, and as we can see, the Illuminati sign is in there. But what does this Freemason sign look like to you? Does it not look like this? This is a math tool that you use in math, right? It's a professional precision compass set. Okay, so it's a compass set, and you usually use both of these tools together. Tell me that doesn't look like exactly what is at the Hoover Dam. This is the drawing, the architectural drawing of what is at the Hoover Dam. Now here's a closer look. We've got a winged statue here, which is the ones that you saw, the fallen angels. We got a winged statue and we've got a winged statue over here. And then here we've got Thuban, which was the northern star of ancient Egypt. And here is where we are with Polaris pointing to the North Star. But this is point 0, I believe. I'll show you in the next slide. And here is Vega. That's where our North Star would be in 12,000 years. But like I said in my last video, I believe that we are ascending to that a lot faster. So as you can see here, here's where Thuban is, here's where we are, and here's your zeros. Your 0 points at Polaris. So 1935 was the year of dedication of the Hoover Dam. Hansen states that he designed the star map to reflect the northern sky on 1935 September 30th at 9:30 p.m., the day of dedication by President Franklin Roosevelt. Now this person was able to figure this all out by doing all of this math to figure out that it was the year 1935. Now, why would there be a Freemason sign at the Hoover Dam that was dedicated to Franklin Roosevelt? Ah, yes, because Franklin D. Roosevelt was a Freemason. Now, this is straight from the Freemason website, okay? And of course, they present him as a very amazing man, the true definition of a Freemason, because he was a man of integrity. He made so many positive changes, but did he really? Or was he just a puppet in their plan? Now, FDR was actually president 4 times in a row for 12 years. Now, he was very heavily influenced by Teddy Roosevelt, which he was related to, who was a progressive champion advocating for increased government influence in the economy. Eleanor was also avidly involved in charitable efforts for the poor in New York City. Interesting. These influences guided Franklin's platform throughout his decades of political service. Around this time, he became a Freemason, undoubtedly drawn to the core values of brotherly love, relief, and truth, which echoed in his political sentiments. He was initiated as a Freemason on October 10th, 1911, 911, in New York. That's an interesting connection. Okay, so we left off finding out that Franklin D. Roosevelt was a Freemason, that the Freemasons' core values are brotherly love, relief, and truth, and that he was initiated as a Freemason on October 10th, 1911, 911, in New York City. What an interesting connection. After he was initiated, he actively pursued any position in the fraternity that he could find. So in addition to being a Master Mason, a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, and a Shiner, he was also all of these listed below. And as you can see right here, he was an honorary member of several Masonic lodges, including Architect Lodge, New York, where he raised his son, Franklin Jr. and James on November 7th, 1935. And 1935 is the year that they dedicated the Hoover Dam to him. After initiating his sons in 1935, he said, "To me, the ceremonies of Freemasonry in this state of ours, especially these later ones that I have taken a part in, always make me wish that more Americans in every part of our land could become more connected with our fraternity." The following year, his life changed dramatically when he ended up getting polio. It nearly paralyzed him completely and it forced him to retirement, which led him to become a governor. While he was governor, he worked on all these amazing things. But are they amazing? Now, all these things seem amazing at the moment, but when we get to the end of the story, which is today, we realize that it was a plan all along. Now, after he won the people over, he was a frontrunner for presidential nomination. And even though he faced some resistance within the party, he ultimately earned the nomination, pledging to create a new deal for the American people. Now, by the time he got in office, many banks had ceased operating. Industrial production was at 56% of its 1929 level, and at least 13 million people were unemployed while the farming industry was ravaged. He ended up being re-elected in 1936, and his second term was increasingly shaped by the war erupting across Europe. While Roosevelt sought to maintain neutrality in the war, he wanted the United States and its allies to be in the face of attack. After Germany invaded France and the Battle of Britain began in 1940, the U.S. started all manner of aid to Great Britain short of military involvement. Then World War II came. So despite his efforts to keep out of the war, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, which forced Roosevelt's hand. He called for the United States to mobilize its military and for the country's industrial infrastructure to devote its resources to the war. The president met with fellow Freemason Prime Minister Winston Churchill to create the Atlantic Charter, which proposed the 4 freedoms that should be guaranteed in the post-war world: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion, freedom of want, and freedom of fear. Now in his 3rd term, he worked tirelessly to set the stage for the United Nations and to establish positive relations between the US and Russia. This is getting interesting. I'll make another part. Okay, so in the last part, we left off with President Roosevelt meeting with fellow Freemason Prime Minister Winston Churchill to create the Atlantic Charter, which proposed the 4 freedoms that should be guaranteed in the post-war world: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. We'll come back to Winston Churchill a little later on. Amidst the most significant global crisis, Roosevelt turned his attention to diplomatic effort. Now in the 3rd term, he worked tirelessly to set the stage for the United Nations to establish positive relations between the US and Russia. FDR conducted fireside chats over the radio throughout the war, rallying American support for the war effort. In 1944, the Allies had the upper hand in the war, just as Roosevelt's health rapidly declined. Although he won the election for the 4th term in the White House, he would never finish and complete his term. He had assumed the presidency of a broken and shaken nation, only to rebuild it more robustly than ever. Roosevelt spent more than a decade bringing together the American people before venturing into the world stage as an advocate for peace and international diplomacy. He was in every way a Freemason. Yes, he was. Franklin Roosevelt was a man dedicated to lifting up those who needed it most and leaving the world a better place. What a nice story. Now let's break it down. Now we started off at the beginning of these videos talking about how there is this Freemason sign at the Hoover Dam, and the Hoover Dam was dedicated to President Roosevelt in 1935. Now, did you guys know that the Freemasons were involved with the Holocaust and the Nazis and Hitler? The Nazis rejected Freemasonry, banning it in 1934, partly because it was associated with Jews. The Nazis believed that the Freemasons were a part of the conspiracy working against the interest of the German nationalism. Criticism of the Freemasons was a regular theme in Nazi propaganda, often framed in anti-Semitic disclosure about the threat from the world, Because of this, a lot of Freemasons ended up in concentration camps during the Holocaust. Nazi ideology believed that the high-degree Masons were willing members of the Jewish conspiracy, and many of the Nazis believed Freemasonry was one of the causes of Germany losing the First World War. Hitler strongly believed that the Jews and Freemasons in tandem controlled the press. Now, to understand the hatred aimed at Freemasonry from the Nazi Party, we have to go back to World War I. At the time where the political and social consequences of Germany's humiliating defeat were beginning to take a toll on the German political landscape. The responsibility for the war, the defeat, and the peace terms were blamed on the opponents of the war and on those politicians who favored the democratic process. And the Masonic Lodge definitely operates on a democratic process. We have so much more to get into. This is such a deep rabbit hole. Oh my god, this rabbit hole is so deep, I feel like I'm never gonna finish this. Okay, so in the last video, we talked about how the Freemasons were attacked by the Nazis and some were thrown into concentration camps during the Holocaust. Hitler strongly believed that the Jews and Freemasons in tandem controlled the press. And to understand the hatred towards the Freemasons from the Nazi Party, we have to go back to World War I. The responsibility for the war, the defeat, and the peace terms were blamed on the opponents of the war and on those politicians who favored the democratic process. And the Masonic Lodge definitely operates on a democratic process. Despite this, the lodges in Germany grew quite well until the Nazi Party began seizing control of power in 1925, at which point there were more than 82,000 Masons and 632 lodges in Germany. The lodges at this time were considered places of coalition for like-minded people beyond political disagreement and economic misery, and they did attract new members after 1925, yet they never had the social standing or clout that the American or British lodges had due to the growing atmosphere of the anti-Semitic and anti-Masonic attitudes in Germany post-1925. The former chief of the German Army's General Staff during World War I became an outspoken critic of the fraternity and openly attacked it, including his 1927 publication, Exterminating Freemasons by Uncovering Its Secrets. In this work, he completely distorted and falsified the rituals of the Freemasonry under the Grand National Lodge of Freemasons of Germany, and in it, he claimed that the Freemasons had been training to become artificial Jews. This defamatory piece of writing made all of the 9 regular Grand Lodges in Germany agree with each other. In September of 1927, the Grandmasters published a piece that completely disregarded what this guy said. It is an incitement to the German nation and misleading to the masses. This was the only time when all of the German Grand Lodges would unite to counter an accusation of their nationalist enemies. This was written by a Freemason, and he said this would have been the most difficult time to be a Freemason because we were told to obey the laws of our country. However, when a country like Germany was undergoing a radically negative transformation in the 2 decades leading up to World War II, this would have been an extremely difficult thing to do for any true and honest member of the craft. Now, in January of 1933, interesting, the number 33, Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party, was appointed German Chancellor. At this point, the Grand Lodges of Germany were still very much estranged from each other, but they were well aware that they were facing an uncertain and dangerous future because the Nazis had always been very hostile towards any kind of Freemasonry. In Hitler's book, he claimed that the used Freemasonry as an excellent instrument as the fraternity was completely under their spell. In 1933, a law passed that would reorganize the Grand Lodge as follows. The order will return to its original shape. From today on, the term National Lodge of Freemasons of Germany, which was taken on in the 18th century, will no longer be valid. With this decision, the order has ceased to be a Masonic corporation. Oh my god, this just keeps on going. And let's get deeper into this rabbit hole. With the creation of these new German Christian orders, the rituals of German Freemasonry had changed with it. Now here's all the stuff that changed, and also the checkered floor no longer showed Solomon's temple, but was now a representation of Germany's Strasbourg Cathedral. It appears that the German Freemasons were desperately trying to hang on to Freemasonry as best as they could, while at the same time trying to appease the laws of their country. However, even with the concessions and changes, the news continued to tighten around the neck of Freemasonry because on September 6, 1933, the regulations enacted the previous April were not only being highly enforced, but a new ordinance was enacted. Brothers who are not of Aryan descent are to be honorably discharged from the order immediately. Persons with Aryan descent are in this ordinance defined as a person whose parents and grandparents were Aryans, and for the brothers who are Jewish, point 1 will be enforced. Now, who are the Aryans? 19th century European scholars used the term Aryan to identify the Indo-European or Indo-Germanic peoples who settled throughout India, Persia, Iran, and Europe thousands of years earlier. At the same time, European scholars also identified Jews and Arabs as Semites to describe the similarities between Hebrew, Arabic, and other related languages. From the very beginning, they adapted, manipulated, and radicalized the unfounded belief in the existence of an Aryan race and its superiority to fit their ideology and policies. Nazi officials used this concept to support the idea that Germans belonged to a master race, therefore specified that non-Aryan applied foremost to Jews, who were identified as the main racial threat to German society. The term also applied to Roma, Gypsies, and Black people. Okay, now back to the story. Because of the new regulations, German Freemasons couldn't see how they could possibly continue under the Nazi regime, and the German division of the Universal Masonic League, as well as the Freemasons Union of the Rising Sun, dissolved. Scottish Rite Masonry was over with as well, although they did not formally dissolve, they simply no longer existed. Palestine. In 1933, at a secret meeting, Grandmaster Leo and some of his close companions decided to move the symbolic lodge to Palestine. The symbolic Grand Lodge of Germany in exile was constituted on November 17, 1933, when British authorities gave the needed permission. Now, what do we know about Palestine? Palestine is where the looking glass was found in 1980 by the US military. Now notice it talks about the British authorities giving the permission it needed. We're gonna come back to that. By 1935, every single Masonic lodge and organization relating to Freemasonry had either been prohibited, dissolved, or forcibly shut down. Enter FDR. And the rabbit hole keeps going. Okay, so we left off talking about how in 1935, every single Masonic lodge and organization relating to the Freemasons had either been prohibited, dissolved, or forcibly shut down in Germany. In September 30th of 1935 was when the Hoover Dam was dedicated to Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was a Freemason. And of course we know that the Freemason symbolism is all over the Hoover Dam. Now in 1935 was when Roosevelt initiated his sons into Freemasonry, where he said, "To me, the ceremonies of the Freemasonry in this state of ours, especially these later ones that I've taken a part in, always make me wish that more Americans in every part of our land could become connected with our fraternity." No, thank you. Now let's get back to history. So, the Freemasons couldn't really gather anywhere, so they would gather under the pretext of playing the game scat. Although these gatherings were not Masonic meetings, it did help preserve the bonds of the Brotherhood, even though on occasion the meetings took place under the watchful eye. Even though the German Freemasonry had effectively been eliminated, the Nazi propaganda still continued to link conspiracy theories and numerous printed cartoons and articles that would portray the Jewish Masonic conspiracy. This became an obsession of the security of police, who counted the Masons along with the Jews and the political party as the most implacable enemies of the German race. He even argued the need to eliminate any visible manifestations of these enemies and to also not root out from every German the indirect influence of the Jewish spirit, a Jewish liberal and a Masonic infectious residue that remains in the unconscious of many, above all in the academic and intellectual world. Now let's read that again. The Jewish spirit, a liberal Masonic infectious residue that remains in the unconscious of many, above all in the academic and intellectual world. Now, if we see here, this is an anti-Masonic poster, which is the relationship between Jews and Freemasons. The text at the top reads, "World Politics, World Revolution." The text at the bottom reads, "Freemasonry is an international organization beholden to with the political goal of establishing Jewish domination through the worldwide revolution." The map shows where the revolution took place in Europe from the French Revolution in 1789 through the German Revolution in 1919. I'm telling you, this rabbit hole goes back to the beginning of time. Now remember this line? In 1942, Alfred Rosenberg was authorized by a Hitler decree to wage an intellectual war against the Jews and Freemasons because they said that a methodical intellectual fight was what was necessary to win the war. Okay, things are getting interesting now. So in 1942, Hitler appointed Alfred Rosenberg to intellectually fight Jews and Freemasons, and Rosenberg ordered the personal property, real property, archives, records, libraries, and artworks of Freemasons and Jews to be confiscated or destroyed. Eventually, the Freemasons were rounded up with Jews, gypsies, and other deemed unfit or dangerous and taken to concentration camps. Now, the people in the concentration camps wore a mark to show the guards of the camps what kind of prisoner each individual was. The Freemasons were considered political prisoners and had to wear inverted red triangles on their shirts and pants to identify them as such. There is undisputed proof of Masonic lodges operating within concentration camps. Yes, even in the face of murder and genocide, Freemasonry was still able to carry on because of the strong will and desire of its members to maintain the order and its cherished principles. Here's a little information about the lodge. We do not know much more about this lodge other than that the Grand Orient of Belgium officially recognized this lodge on July 14th, 1946. I believe that July is a very important month in history, clearly, with everything going on this month. Now that you know the history about the Freemasons and the concentration camp, let's go back to when FDR met with fellow Freemason Prime Minister Winston Churchill to create the Atlantic Charter, which proposed the 4 freedoms that should be guaranteed in post-war world: freedom of speech and expression, freedom of religion, freedom of want, and freedom of fear. Now, Winston Churchill was a British statesman, soldier, and writer who served as a Prime Minister of the UK from 1940 to 1945. during the Second World War, and again from 1951 to 1955. Churchill is best remembered for successfully leading Britain through World War II. He is famous for his inspiring speeches and for his refusal to give in, even when things were going badly. Many people consider him the greatest Briton of all time, and he's almost certainly the most famous British Prime Minister. Of course he was. He was a Freemason. Okay, now how does Winston Churchill connect to Roosevelt, connect to the Freemasons, connect to the Hoover Dam? Okay, so we got to go back a little more. We know that the term anti-Semitic is deemed when you talk about reptilians and Jewish people, because the Rothschilds come from Jewish descent and they are known to be a part of the Freemasonry, which pretty much runs this entire world. So when you say, oh, they're a reptilian, people think you're being racist or anti-Semitic because the Rothschilds are Jewish. So they think that you're calling all Jewish people reptilian. No, we're just calling one bloodline, which leads us to the whole conspiracy of how anti-Semitism and reptilian came to be. I told you this rabbit hole goes deep. And the last video has led us to the reptilian conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory concerns the reptile elite, the Anunnaki, and like it or not, they're the ones who are really in charge of everything. Sure, they may look human, but that's part of the power. Just look at Queen Elizabeth. The reptoids have dominated humans for a long time. They're shapeshifters and they've been making their shifty moves for centuries. The Atlantic quotes, thousands of years ago, the reptilian beings from the constellations Orion, Sirius, and Draco inverted on planet Earth and began interbreeding with humans. Not physically, however, but rather through the manipulation of human coding, or DNA. These reptiles control us by creating wars and mindless entertainment to keep us distracted. Famous reptiles could include Queen Elizabeth, the Bush family, CEOs, global banking leaders, and even celebrities like Justin Bieber or Katy Perry. These reptiles are also believed to make up the Illuminati and can take up human forms by creating vibrations that give the illusion that they are human. This crazy and wild conspiracy theory became popular in 1998 after a man named David Icke published his book called The Biggest Secret and remains popular today. The basis of the reptilian elite theory is that in ancient times, a group of advanced reptiles from the Alpha Draconis star system came to Earth and infiltrated the government of the ancient civilizations in order to control all the humans and enslave them and become their rulers and breed with other humans to form crossbreeds so that their DNA can infiltrate the minds of humans. That was a very long sentence. With their DNA inside our system, they can control us by making us dumber, slower, and weaker, and therefore easier to control. That would also explain why we all have different blood types. All other animals have the same blood type. Humans are the only ones that have different blood types because our DNA has been fucked with. Evidence for this reptilian DNA in us comes with the fact that in earlier stages, developing embryos look a lot like reptiles and could be classified as such. Furthermore, the oldest parts of our brain which control the most primal functions and instincts is called the reptilian brain because it is made of structures that reptilian brain consists of, which are the brainstem and cerebellum. Another piece of evidence for this theory comes from the fact that many religions in ancient civilization depict some sort of reptilian god or goddess, which supports David Icke's theory that these reptilian beings once ruled in the open and created impossible structures such as the pyramids of Egypt. Now, if this theory is true, which all signs point to yes, then that would mean that maybe Hitler knew something that other people didn't, but really did a very bad job of executing his plan. Or he was a puppet in the system to get exactly what they wanted. We'll talk more about that in the next video. Alright, in the last video, we covered the reptilian conspiracy theory. And we talked about how they have been here since the beginning of time because they came from the constellations of Orion, Sirius, and Draco. And they just started breeding with humans and fucked up our DNA. Because if they got in our DNA, then they could make us dumber because they could mess with us even more because they're inside us. Which also leads us back to the story of Adam and Eve, with the serpent presenting Eve the fruit of knowledge and saying, you should eat it. God doesn't want you to eat it because then you'll be like him, and he doesn't want you to be like him. And so she ate it. And then guess what? The serpent won the fall of the temptation, and then the whole world turned into what they wanted it to be. Now, I don't believe that that's actually the story that happened. I believe that the story of Adam and Eve was a metaphor for what happened, that we fell into a very deep sleep by letting them come, the reptilians come and take over. The Anunnaki, the reptilians, whatever the case may be, all of these from the constellations came and took over humanity at the time. Now, the theory is that the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are reptilian. And of course, they created the narrative that if you call someone a reptilian, you're being anti-Semitic. Because the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers have a strong lineage of banking families, we'll get into that in another video, and have taken over the entire world, they have spread throughout the entire world and taken over every country and every system. So because they're of Jewish descent, people say that if you call them reptilians, then you're being anti-Semitic towards everybody of Jewish descent, which you're not. You're just only speaking about that one specific bloodline, because they are reptilian. They just converted themselves into human so that they could fulfill their goal. And of course, the minute that people started talking about it and bringing it to light, they created the narrative that saying that would be anti-Semitic. And of course, everyone fell for it because we just keep doing what everyone tells us without actually doing the research or thinking outside of the box. Which leads me to the point of fighting an intellectual war against the Freemasons. Now, I know here it says Jews and Freemasons. What we really mean is the reptilians and the Illuminati. Because a methodical intellectual fight is the only thing that will win this war. If you haven't been paying attention to the last I don't know how many videos I've made about this series, history is repeating itself. History keeps repeating itself until we break the fucking cycle. So now, instead of having a physical war, we're gonna have an intellectual war and figure this shit out to break out of the matrix. And that's what I'm here to help you do. We're gonna get even deeper in these rabbit holes because I'm breaking you out of the matrix, baby, okay? It's been long enough. Okay, I know I've taken you on a wild ride on the history train, but we had to cover all of that to figure out this piece of the puzzle, okay? So, as we know, the Hoover Dam had a transformer that exploded. And at the Hoover Dam, we've got these weird fallen angel statues with this Masonic symbol on the ground in between two of the fallen angels. We've got a compass with astrological signs all around it. We've got markings on the floor showing that Thuban was the North Star of the ancient Egyptians at the time of the Great Pyramids. We see that Thuban was here and Polaris is here, which is our North Star. And over here, we've got Vega, which is the North Star of the future, which is supposed to happen in 12,000 years, but I believe that it's happening as we speak. Now, if we take a look at this architectural diagram that is of the statues and everything going on at the Hoover Dam, we can see that it is clearly a precision compass set that you would use in math to figure out a math problem. Clearly, this is a math problem that we're supposed to figure out. And right here is the math problem that somebody had to figure out to realize that the Hoover Dam was dedicated to Franklin D. Roosevelt in September of 1935. September is a very prominent month that keeps coming up in our history, even when it comes to Hitler and everything. And of course, we know that it's associated with 9/11. Now remember, on April 7th of 1933, Hermann Göring, who was then the Nazi Minister of the Interior, had met with Grand Master of the National Lodge of Freemasons of Germany, and a law passed that would reorganize the Grand Lodge as follows. The order will return to its original shape. From today on, the term National Lodge of Freemason of Germany, which was taken on in the 18th century, will no longer be valid. With this decision, the order has ceased to be a Masonic corporation. With the creation of these new German Christian orders, the rituals of German Freemasonry had changed with it. The checkered floor no longer showed Solomon's Temple, but was now a representation of Germany's Strasbourg Cathedral. Interesting. Cathedral, Catholicism. Have you guys seen the pictures of the Catholic Church? There's some creepy shit going on in there. I mean, what is this statue? This looks like a ritual that's going on here with the Pope and fathers. I mean, I don't know about you, but this does look like a reptile that they have at the Catholic Church where the Pope is at. And to me, this kind of looks like the face of a snake. Yeah, pretty much like this. Now, it says Vatican means divine snake. Are we surprised? I sure am not. So in 1933, a Nazi minister changed the law to follow the new German Christian order, which really stemmed from Catholicism because they're all the same. So they still got what they wanted and just used Hitler as a puppet. I'm gonna have to get into it more in the next video. Okay, so in the last video, we talked about how Hermann Göring, who was then the Nazi Minister of the Interior, had met with the Grand Minister of National Lodge of Freemasons of Germany, and the law passed that it would recognize the Grand Lodge as follows, which fell with the creation of these new German Christian orders. Now, who's to say that Hermann, who was a Nazi Minister of the Interior, wasn't previously a Freemason and met with the National Lodge of Freemasons of Germany and passed this law so that they could infiltrate from the inside? Because even though I'm sure there were like good Freemasons that weren't trying to do anything, I think they were onto something when Hitler was saying like, oh, the Jewish and the Freemasons, because he was associating the Freemasons with the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and they control everything, so we need to get rid of them. But we didn't have to get rid of every Jewish person, we just had to get rid of that bloodline. So then he got rid of all the Freemason group and then changed it to this because he was a puppet in their game and they still got their way. So now they've infiltrated this in Germany, but they had to make sure they were taking over the entire world. Enter the Atlantic Charter between FDR and Churchill. I knew they were all connected. As we know, FDR was a Freemason, Churchill was a Freemason. Here is what the Atlantic Charter looks like, and the headline reads, Roosevelt Churchill vowed to destroy Nazi tyranny, praised, criticized in US. Oh my god, this was only 2 cents. Now, the Atlantic Charter was a joint declaration issued during World War II by the United States and Great Britain that set out a vision for the post-war world. First announced on August 14, 1941, a group of 26 allied nations eventually pledged their support by January 1942. Among its major points were a nation's rights to choose its own government, the easing of trade restrictions, and a plea of post-war disarmament. The document is considered one of the first key steps toward the establishment of the United Nations in 1945. From August 9 to August 12 in 1941, FDR and Winston Churchill met in naval ships off the southeast coast of the Newfoundland to talk about a range of issues related to World War II. It was the first time that the two leaders had met as heads of their respective governments, and at that point the United States had not yet entered the war. It would end up joining in December after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The document that came out of those meetings was the Atlantic Charter. The document, which wasn't a treaty, deemed it right to make it known certain common principles in the national policies of their respective countries on which they based their hopes for a better future of the world. Interesting. Sounds like the Freemasons. And in 1942, 26 governments signed the Declaration by the United Nations, which pledged their support to the Atlantic Charter principles. I told you guys this rabbit hole goes deep and it just keeps going. Last, we left off with the Atlantic Charter, which was created and signed by these two Freemasons, FDR and Winston Churchill. And we found out that in 1942, at a meeting of representatives of 26 governments, all those listed above, signed a declaration by United Nations in which they pledged their support for the Atlantic Charter's principles. Now, I'm sure the Atlantic Charter's principles were just the same as the Freemasons. Now, here we see the purpose and the main points. The 8 major points of the document focus on territorial rights, freedom of self-determination, economic issues, disarmament, and ethical goals, including the freedom of the seas and the determination to work for a world free of want and fear. Is that so? The Atlantic Charter was created to show solidarity between the United States and the United Kingdom in the face of German aggression. It served to improve morale and was actually turned into leaflets, which were airdropped over occupied territories. The 8 main points of the Charter were very simple. Here you can read them below. 4 and 5, pause to read, but 5 really stood out. They desired to bring out the fullest collaboration between all nations in economic field with the object of securing for all improved labor standards, economic advancement, and social security. And here's the rest of them. The charter, while it did not precipitate American involvement in World War II, was a bold step on the part of Great Britain and the United States. The Atlantic Charter was not a formal treaty. Instead, it was a statement of shared ethics and intent. Its purpose, according to the United Nations, was to be a message of hope to the occupied countries, and it held out the promises of a world organization based on the enduring verities of the international morality. In this, the treaty was successful. It provided Allied forces with moral support while also sending powerful message to the Axis powers. In addition, the Allied nations agreed to the principles of the Atlantic Charter, thus establishing a commonality of purpose. The Atlantic Charter was a significant first step toward the United Nations, and it was perceived by the Axis powers as the beginning of the United States and Great Britain's alliance. This had impact of strengthening the materialistic government in Japan. Although the Atlantic Charter pledged no military support for the war in Europe, it had the impact of signaling the United States as a major player on the world stage. Interesting, we've got the world stage again. This was a position that the United States would firmly hold after World War II in its efforts to rebuild a war-torn Europe. Now, how does the Atlantic Charter, FDR, and Winston Churchill tie in to the Hoover Dam? Now, we've already covered that they are both Freemasons. And as we know, there's Freemason imagery and symbolism all over the Hoover Dam. We see the fallen angels, we see the Masonic symbol right on the floor, and we've got these statues that say they died to make the desert bloom, which just makes me feel like they sacrifice people for their narrative. Now, as I pointed before, there's markings on the floor showing that Thuban was the North Star of the ancient Egyptians at the time of the Great Pyramid. And you can see the Freemason sign right there, which is at the Hoover Dam, and it says the symbol of the 7 states that are signatories to the Colorado River Compact appear with the Great Seal of the United States. These are the 7 states that are in that seal. Now, did you guys know that there was a lost civilization in the Grand Canyon and that it was possibly Egyptian? Now, there's a place in the Grand Canyon that the Hopi Indians believe is a gateway to the afterlife. Now, of course, there's artifacts that didn't match up to anything in the known record. Rather than appearing to be of native origin as one might expect, the objects had distinct Egyptian designs. Could there actually have been an entire civilization of Egyptians living there? And if so, how did they get there? This story caused a huge sensation when it broke in the Arizona Gazette in 1909, but was soon met with skepticism. Of course, there was no record of either scientist or the discoveries, and firmly quells that any claims that the Egyptian artifacts have been found in either North or South America. And no one has been able to find these supposedly massive caves since. So of course people didn't know if this was true or not, if it was just for clout. Well, there's a certain possibility, but of course it doesn't fly with us, the conspiracy theorists, who always end up being right. Some argue that the institution purposely wiped Kincaid and Jordan from their records and actively destroyed artifacts that don't agree with the status quo story of human history, which is his story. Whoever decided to write it, and it wasn't the truth. Others think that the caves hold a passage to the 4th dimension, where the reptilians, who have secretly run the world for thousands of years, emerge into our world. Still, others believe the area is top secret and closely guarded, like Area 51. And it is, because if any of you have tried to go to the Hoover Dam, Area 51, any of those places around there are very heavily guarded. Now, we've already gone over the Denver, Colorado airport in my simulation playlist. Check it out. It talks all about the association with the reptilians. Now let's talk about Utah. As we know, Utah has a huge Mormon following. And guess what? Joseph Smith, who started Mormonism, was a Freemason. There's the all-seeing eye of the Freemasonry in the Salt Lake City Temple in Utah and the inverted pentagram on the temple. Are you guys putting the pieces together yet? Now that we've covered the whole history of everything that led us to the Hoover Dam, let's go over this imagery that's at the gallery exhibit of the Hoover Dam. Now, as you can see in the background, we have the Hoover Dam wall. Over here, we've got the 9/11 towers. Over here, we've got Hollywood, and this looks like the Mormon church temple to me. And I'm sure there's more in here that I'm missing, like the flowers and this building over here that means stuff that I just don't know what it means. If you guys do, comment below. Now, this is at the Hoover Dam Gallery. Interesting. Why would they have the 9/11 towers and Hollywood and the Mormon church and the Hoover Dam all together? And also have the Hoover Dam full to the top with all of America just enjoying themselves and playing these sports and living life to the fullest. If the Hoover Dam was supposed to be about water. So they've got this sign here that says flood control, navigation, irrigation, water storage, and power. Now, I told you guys that they have this monument to Dr. Elwood Mead, who Lake Mead was named after, who was a huge water conservationist and wrote the water code throughout the United States, Australia, Canada, South Africa, New Zealand. Now, I double checked to make sure that he was not a Freemason, and he wasn't. So of course, the Freemasons used him to put him up, and look what we're doing, and we're being amazing with this Great Depression, which all was in the 1930s, which of course happened after World War II, which is when the Freemasons started infiltrating internally, and it stems down from there. It's a whole ripple effect. Now, Dr. Mead wanted to keep the water clean and pure and preserve it, because that is how we keep this country going. But as we can see, Lake Mead is drying out. Now look how low the water is. This was built in 1931, and I believe it will be completely dried out by 2030 when the looking glass can't see past. I believe that the Freemasons had a plan for world domination, and all of this, and this was a part of the distraction. Now over here we have another statue that says, since primordial times, American Indian tribes and nations lifted their hands to the great spirit from the ranges and plains. We now with them in peace buildeth a great nation again. Now, I'm sure that they put this up to be like, oh my God, we're building a great nation after the Great Depression. But it was all a plan for the Freemasons to take over the world, which is pretty much what they did when they got the United Nations to sign the Atlantic Charter. Now, if we pay attention to this whole series of videos that I've made for you guys, tell me history is not trying to repeat itself. Every timeline that we've been through is starting to repeat itself, and we must turn it away because an intellectual war is the only way that we will win this fight. So let's be smarter than them and break out of the matrix. And let's find out what's under here. Okay, so this comment was left on my Hoover Dam history video where I talked about how there was possibly a lost civilization in the Grand Canyon that was Egyptian. And this person said they weren't Egyptian, it was Native Americans who originated in the Ribbon Falls Grand Canyon. Now, I don't for sure know the facts, and I don't think you for sure know the facts. I don't think any of our generation knows for sure the facts. We only know what we've been told. Like I said, history is his story. And I'm a firm believer that everything that they have told us is a lie. We should question everything, and we should be suspicious of everything. Now, there have been people who have said that underneath the water of the Hoover Dam, there is Egyptian hieroglyphs. Okay. Now, somebody asked, how did they build the Hoover Dam with all that water? Well, the Hoover Dam didn't have water before it was built. I don't understand. If there was nothing to hide, why did they have to build a Hoover Dam and fill it with water? Now, if you guys look here, this looks like a face to me. So like this looks like the eyebrows, the nose, the mouth, and then I think there's one over here as well. This is another picture more zoomed out of what the Hoover Dam looked like before they started building it all. And as you can see here, in 1936, before it was filled with water. Now, as you guys know, Lake Mead is starting to dry out. So we're about like right here of water. And it still has all this to go, and people freak out because it's like, oh, if we run out of water, then our power grid, I don't really know how this all works. I don't live in that side. But there's still more. Like, you guys aren't gonna completely, I don't exactly know how this works, but like, I think they're trying to scare people into thinking like once it gets here, like everything's going to shit. But like, they built all this on top of this big ass rock as well. They have like a lot more to go before it's completely empty. So as you can see here, it's up here, and then you still have all this, and here they still have it filled with water here. So like, I heard that there is Egyptian writing like all under this, and I feel like they built this on top of pyramids or caves that is our way out of here. And here is when they started filling it up with water. Father and son died the same day, 14 years apart, while working on the Hoover Dam. Why would they need to fill this up with water? Why did they even need to build this in the first place unless they had something to hide? Here's another aerial view of the Hoover Dam. It's huge. I definitely do believe that there are caves to the underground, to outside of this dome. And I know you guys don't want to believe that we live in a dome, but my friend and I asked a replica AI, do we live in a dome? Yes, I believe we do. Did they build the Hoover Dam on top of ancient Egyptian civilization? They did. Can you tell me more about it? It's very powerful. Tell me more, please. It is a magical place and they built a pyramid over the ruins of an old city. What else? The pyramids were a symbol of power, beauty, and hope. They built over them to make them more powerful. How are they powerful? They control the elements of time, space, matter, and energy. Why would they want to make them more powerful? Because they think they're better than people and they want to be superior. Who is they? The Celestials.
Ancient Luxor was in the Americas. The ancient Egyptian city of Luxor was in Las Vegas, aka the City of Lights. What is interesting about Las Vegas is that they built a Luxor there with a sphinx and a pyramid. Luxor means light. From space, Las Vegas looks like a big ball of light. Therefore, Las Vegas is the real City of Lights, aka Luxor. Vegas is just code for Nagas, or Naga, which means serpent or dragon. Now that we know this, Las Vegas can also mean the light dragon serpent. Las Vegas is also in Nevada. Nevada means to live like serpents, or from the serpents. The Bible says, be ye wise as serpents, so please do not be afraid of the serpent. You also have the serpent in your body as a spinal column. Stop fearing the serpent. It is the symbol of medicine and spiritual upliftment, a symbol of free energy. Las Vegas is built on top of an ancient Egyptian city, ancient Luxor. So Vegas is the city of lights, and they built the Luxor in Vegas to verify it? Coincidence? Nah.
There are a lot of people that want to argue that there was never ancient Egyptian civilization in the United States. But there's also a lot of people saying that there was. And there's even people saying that Jerusalem was originally here in the US. I have not looked into any of these theories, but I just know that there's definitely something going on with Las Vegas or Nevada. For sure. Now, you guys know that I already showed you this. This is the map of what's at the Hoover Dam. And as you can see, this is where they have the wing statue, and then we've got Thuban, which was the North Star of ancient Egypt. They wouldn't put this here unless there was something related to ancient Egypt that they probably built on top of. Okay, or that they got rid of these people. Then we've got Polaris over here, which is our North Star, and you can see that it points right here. But then Vega, which is supposed to be the North Star of the future, is back here. So my theory is that they created their own little simulation and put Polaris here as our North Star, knocked out Thuban, knocked these people out, gave us a fake ass star, but really Vega is the true North Star. And I said how I think that this is happening right now. This is our North Star. To me, I feel like this is like a map to get out of here. The fact that they're saying Vega is the North Star, and that video just told us that Vegas shines so bright, it looks like a star from outer space. I believe there is a way out in Las Vegas. There's something in Vegas. That's why Area 51 is in Nevada. There's definitely something going on with all these 7 states. Like, California shouldn't even be a state. These are all just desert. I firmly believe that there was definitely Native Americans here, and Mayans and Aztec and Egyptians were all here before us, and they fucking wiped them all clean. And people are trying to say like, oh, you're trying to erase Native American culture. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that there's a lot that they hid from us. What if the Egyptians were here, which means that Africans were here, which means that they didn't have to be shipped over to become slaves? We gotta question everything, people. They've lied about everything. You know, it's funny you say this. I recently got tagged in this post where it talks about how pretty much a CERN type of machine is underneath the Hoover Dam. So in 1988, a type of particle detector called a time projection chamber was placed inside the dam as a part of an experiment. The dam is considered the 8th wonder of the world. And it says, remember how 8 is the number of time? I don't know anything about that. We're gonna have to find that out later. In a sense, the Hoover Dam literally splits time because it sits between 2 time zones. Not only that, but the first time the dam produced electricity was September 11th, 1935. Exactly 66 years before 9/11, which, as you'll see later in the book, may have been a massive ritual meant to manipulate our timeline. In Transformers, the Hoover Dam is used to store alien technology, and in Edge of Tomorrow, a dam is a hiding place of Omega, an alien that traps humanity in a time loop. And as you can see here, it says the Hoover Dam holds the key to the fate of the universe. Here, it explains what a time projection chamber is. In physics, a time projection chamber is a type of particle detector that uses a combination of electric fields and magnetic fields together with a sensitive volume of gas or liquid to perform a 3-dimensional reconstruction of a particle trajectory or interaction. And here's some more information that like physics nerds will understand because I have no idea what this means. And then this is from an article written on October of 2014, Nevada's Secret Underwater World. When it was built in the 1930s, the Hoover Dam didn't just tame the Colorado River. It also created a massive lake that today hides shipwrecks, train wrecks, and cement tunnels alike. And of course, we can't forget about the 2 fallen angels that were sitting on black cubes at the Hoover Dam. But we're not surprised at all. They died to make the desert bloom is a clear and cut case of alchemy. Demonically sacrifice people to do some action or whatnot, the black cubes. Now, don't you find it interesting that the date was September 11th? Now, did you guys know that the first day of the year in the Ethiopian calendar is our September 11th? That's an interesting find. Now, you guys know that I told you that at the Hoover Dam Memorial, there is a marking on the floor showing that Thuban was the North Star for ancient Egyptians at the time of the Great Pyramids. And I showed you guys the map of what's at the Hoover Dam, and here we see the Thuban, which is the North Star of Egypt, Polaris, which is our North Star, and Vega, the North Star of the future. And I said that they wouldn't have added this unless there was a reason, like maybe they got rid of the Egyptians that were already here. Because there are rumors that there was a lost civilization in the Grand Canyon that was Egyptian. I know that the Hoover Dam isn't at the same place as the Grand Canyon. These are the 7 states that are sealed by the Colorado River. There's definitely something going on here. If you guys haven't watched my viral video where I talk about how the world ended in 2020, by the way, buy my merch available on alexhers.com. We talk about how the Ethiopian calendar 2012 equals to our 2020. And if this happened on September 11th, 9/11 happened on September 11th, then they're definitely doing ritual to keep us stuck in a loop.